Perfect. There we go. Okay. Welcome everyone to another Math Climate Research Network colloquium. Today we have Reyk Börner speaking. Reyk is currently at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. Before that, he got his PhD in applied mathematics at the University of Reading in the UK. His research interests lie at the intersection of complex systems, statistical physics, and Earth system science. And as a postdoc at Utrecht, he's studying the risk of climate tipping points, particularly concerning Atlantic Ocean circulation, which is what he'll be speaking about today. And with that, hand it over. Look forward to hearing you talk.
Great. Thank you very much for this kind introduction and for the invitation. It's an honor to be able to speak here. And it looks to me like everyone in the audience is relatively familiar with the AMOC. I will just give a quick introduction. The Atlantic Meridional Overturning circulation is a system of ocean currents stretching all across the Atlantic. Here's a schematic picture of some of the surface flows. There's the Gulf Stream here extending into the North Atlantic current. And then in the North Atlantic, in the region of the subpolar gyre, you have sites of deep water formation where water sinks and flows back as a deep current towards the south. And this circulation is crucial for Europe's climate and the general heat transport, the meridional heat transport in the Northern Hemisphere. And there is a lot of concern that the AMOC could weaken as a result of climate change or even undergo a collapse. Now, there is a lot of research going on this topic, both in terms of looking whether one can detect early warning of a potential abrupt weakening, and generally how this current system will evolve under future greenhouse gas emissions. And climate models overall agree in that the AMOC will weaken as a result of global warming, but by how much and how quickly, that is still a big question. And I would like to highlight an additional complication here, which was shown, for example, by a paper by Romanou et al. 2 years ago. So they analyzed simulations of the NASA GISS model, which is a CMIP6 model, and that was forced with an SSP2 4.5 scenario. So that's kind of intermediate greenhouse gas forcing. And when you look at this ensemble of 10 members, you see an ensemble splitting, meaning that some ensemble members recover after a while 2 of them further weaken and undergo a seeming collapse. This is here on the y-axis. We have the overturning strength measured in volume transport at 48 degrees north. So all these simulations have experienced the same time-dependent forcing, but their response is fundamentally different. And by construction, early warning signs that rely on critical slowing down would not be able to distinguish between those 2 that collapse here and the others that don't. And there's a second example that came out in the literature recently by Gu et al., which is maybe a bit less pronounced, but it still also shows a kind of ensemble splitting. So here we see the AMOC strength in the bottom panel, and the authors have here separated an ensemble of, I think, 100 members into 2 groups, which showed a stronger and a less strong AMOC weakening. And particularly when you look at the North Atlantic sea surface temperatures, you see that one group of the ensemble has a much stronger dip in sea surface temperature than the other one. So there is a large increase variance across the ensemble here. And this is also with an SSP scenario as forcing, which is slightly higher emission than the scenario here for Romanu et al. So the question is now, how can we understand this ensemble splitting? And we looked at a climate model of intermediate complexity to address this question. The model is called PlaSim-LSG, and just to give you a feel of the resolution, I plotted the ocean mask here. So it is an Earth-like model, but if you are Italian, you might not be so super happy with this model, given the gigantic Mediterranean Sea. But yeah, it has a 5.6 degree resolution in the atmosphere, solving the moist primitive equations, and 3.6 degree ocean resolution here. And the component is the large scale ocean model. Additionally, there is a thermodynamic sea ice component and a dynamic hydrological cycle. So we have all these components coupled here in the model. And we also ran experiments with SSP scenarios. Of course, this is now a simplified model, and we only take the CO2 component here, not other greenhouse gases. But we investigated 3 different scenarios: SSP 1 2.6, 2 4.5, and 4 6.0. So this is a low, intermediate, and high emission scenario. And if we force the model with these forcings, then we see the following behavior in the AMOC strength, where here we show the AMOC strength between 46 and 66 degrees north for 3 ensemble members each, just for illustration purposes. So in the low emission scenario, the AMOC survives and remains relatively unchanged in all ensemble members. In the high emission scenario, the AMOC undergoes an abrupt weakening to an almost off state here. In all ensemble members. And then in the intermediate scenario, which is the same as the one we saw previously for the ensemble splitting in Romanu et al., we also get an ensemble splitting again here, and quite a chaotic transient behavior of the AMOC before it kind of decides for its fate. And this does not only show in the ocean circulation, this also has a signal, for example, even in the global mean surface temperature. So we see that, as expected, the warming becomes stronger the higher the emission scenario is. But in the intermediate case here, we have quite a large ensemble spread and a large uncertainty in the amount of global warming.
Can I just ask a question about the model?
Yes, please.
So if it's geostrophic, then that will not capture the, what do you call it, the sinking or the subduction of warm, salty water in the northern latitudes, right? Which is a key part of the AMOC. Is that in the dynamic cycle, or?
Yeah, that's right. So it does not capture that dynamically, but it has what is called a convective adjustment scheme. So it, at each time step in the ocean, the stability of the water column is evaluated, and if it is unstable, then the adjacent boxes are mixed from the top to bottom until the water column is stable. So this is kind of a, yeah, not a very dynamical way, but it's what one does in these simplified models to still have an account of convection. And we will look at, yeah, sorry.
So what was the reason for doing that? You have a primitive atmospheric model, and at the in the ocean where you really need the geostrophic part because of the overturning circulation, you are neglecting that. Why?
Yes. So Because you will see that we want to run a lot of simulations with this model. So we are doing it because we need a fast model. And yeah, this is why we chose this intermediate complexity version.
Can you comment on the declines in the CO2 concentration beyond 2200?
Yes, so there are extended SSP scenarios until 2500. So they have been proposed, and this is the data we are using. But then beyond 2500, to kind of smoothly continue the scenarios, we just took the slope at the end of the scenario and assumed an exponential decay back towards 360 ppm.
Okay, so that is not part of the scenario. It's just that it's what you put into the model.
Yeah, because the scenarios end at 2500. So after that, we have to make a choice of how to continue the forcing. So, but I don't want to argue for the realism of these results here. I just, my main point is that we observe an ensemble splitting in this model under a time-dependent CO2 forcing scenario. And now let us look a bit more into the dynamics of this model to understand what is going on. So the model that we're looking at is bistable in the AMOC, at least for the CO2 values we have investigated. There is a weak AMOC state, which is characterized by this stream function here. So you see it's not completely off, but here in the North Atlantic, where we measured the AMOC strength, it is almost collapsed. And then there is the strong AMOC state that corresponds more to today's circulation with an AMOC strength of around 16 Swerdrup. And what we would like to do now is to not only look at the equilibria, but to understand what goes on globally in the phase space of the model. And conceptually, we may therefore think of the model living in a global quasi-potential landscape, where these two attractors here are minima in the landscape. Then we have a basin boundary that separates those initial conditions that lead to the weak AMOC state from others that lead to the strong AMOC state. And on the basin boundary, there will be at least one state which is an attractor of the dynamics when restricting to the basin boundary. That is the edge state, or has also called Melancholia state. And this is a special type of saddle, often a chaotic saddle, that has only one unstable direction, so that it can separate the phase space. And the stable set of this saddle is the segment of the basin boundary around it. And since the edge state is attracting along the basin boundary, it can play a very important role for the transient dynamics of the system, and has also been shown to be important for noise-induced transitions if the noise is sufficiently weak, as well as for bifurcation-induced tipping, as we will see in the next slides. So this here is, of course, a super simplified picture, and the basin boundary is not a line in a climate model like PlaSim-LSG, but we have a high dimensional complex set. But this is just kind of the framework that we're looking from which we are viewing this problem. So how can one find an edge state in a big climate model? Of course, we cannot do this with just one long simulation because the edge state is unstable. So a trajectory will never converge to that state. However, we can still find this edge state by a method called the edge tracking algorithm, which is also only relies on forward simulation. And to do this, we start with two initial conditions that belong to either basin of attraction. And then in the whole phase space of the model, so in all degrees of freedom, we interpolate between these initial conditions and find two new initial conditions on this interpolated line that lie close to each other, but on either side of the basin boundary. We can then run simulations from these initial conditions and verify that they belong to either attractor. And these trajectories will stay close to each other for a while because they are attracted along the stable set of the edge state here. But then after a while will diverge. And after a certain divergence criterion, we stop and we reinterpolate, finding two new initial conditions that are close to each other again, but on either side of the basin boundary. And this gives an iterated procedure. If we follow again, so we run simulations, once they diverge, we interpolate. Oop, okay, doesn't show anymore. But I think the idea is clear. So you just iteratively do this procedure, and this will bring you closer and closer to the edge state. And once you are on the edge state or near the edge state, this this algorithm will converge. Of course, it will only converge to a point if the edge state is actually a saddle point. If it is a chaotic set, then the edge tracking algorithm will slowly populate this invariant set, which is the edge state. To see how this works in action, let us first look at a simple conceptual climate model, which is the Stommel model. So this is kind of the seminal model of a bistable ocean circulation composed of two boxes. And we couple this Stommel model to a fast chaotic atmosphere given by the Lorentz 84 model. And you see that here the system is coupled in both directions. And an essential feature is that we have a timescale separation between the slow ocean dynamics and the fast atmospheric dynamics. So we have a fast chaotic atmosphere forcing the ocean. And we can look at the bifurcation diagram of this model with respect to the freshwater forcing into the northern box here. And for those of you who know the Stommel model, this is looks very much like the bifurcation diagram of the uncoupled Stommel model, just that now, because of the chaotic forcing, we don't have points here as fixed points, but we have chaotic attractors. And I've just kind of visualized by plotting some points on this attractor to show that this is now an extended chaotic set and not just a point. And we can now look at a phase space plot in the ocean variables T and S, so the temperature and salinity differences, to see that when we are, for example, here at this level of freshwater flux given by the black line, we have a separation of the strong AMOC state, the weak AMOC state, and the edge state, which we now computed using the edge tracking algorithm. And if we move closer to the bifurcation point by increasing the freshwater flux, I'll just go back and forth, we see that as expected, the attractors and the edge state move in the phase space because we are changing the forcing, and specifically the edge state and the strong AMOC state get closer to each other. And at some point, the two chaotic sets start to collide with each other, which is known as a boundary crisis. And at the boundary crisis, the strong AMOC state loses stability, and we only have the weak AMOC state as the remaining attractor, and the system is monostable. However, close to but beyond the bifurcation point, we still have this chaotic set here which is kind of the merged object of the former on state and the ghost state, that is now not an attractor, it's not stable, but it has a long lifetime, and it is called ghost state because it kind of preserves many of the dynamics of the former on state. And we can see this by choosing an ensemble of initial conditions on the former on state, and then looking at a freshwater forcing value that is just beyond the bifurcation point, and then looking at how the members of this ensemble evolve. And we see that this is for 200 members here. All of them eventually collapse to the weak AMOC state, but the lifetime varies greatly across more than one order of magnitude. And in fact, as one would expect from theory, the lifetimes are roughly exponentially distributed. And this presents a big limit to predictability, because if we would be up here and only have observations, we wouldn't even notice that we are not in a bistable regime anymore, and that the state we are living in is actually not stable, but it might still take a very long time until we undergo a transition. Now, this was for the simple conceptual model, but we don't want to stop there. We don't want to stop at the spherical cow, but go back to PlaSim now, the PlaSim-LSG, which is also not a super high resolution cow, but at least a cow that has some legs and a tail and a face. And it has around 10 to the 5 degrees of freedom. So from a mathematical point of view, it is definitely a high dimensional system. So let us now perform this edge tracking algorithm in the model PlaSim-LSG. To do this, we start from the strong and the weak AMOC states that we found earlier. And if we look at time series of these states, we see that there is some variability, but they are stable. We have verified this not only for 400, but for 4,000 years. And now, as I introduced the edge tracking algorithm, the procedure is to now interpolate in all degrees of freedom of the model between these two states here, and find two new initial conditions that are close to each other, but that over time converge to the different attractors. So we can see that this is indeed what happens with these two simulations here. And then we define a criterion, which in our case is if they diverge by one Swerdrup. We then stop and interpolate again on this second gray dashed line. And the green line here now shows the average between the orange and the blue, which is now our estimate of the basin boundary. So we have a pseudo trajectory on the basin boundary now. And doing this running simulations again after interpolating gives again one simulation that goes to the on state, one that goes to the off state. And we can now repeatedly do this to track the basin boundary. So by interpolating here, we landed somewhere on the basin boundary, and now we are following the flow on the basin boundary towards what we hope will lead us to an edge state. Now I'll just show the additional iterations here. Sometimes sometimes we are lucky and the two trajectories stay close to each other for a very long time, and then we get quite a long segment. Sometimes it's rather short, and then we have to restart again. But after a while, something interesting happens. We see that the behavior, at least in terms of the AMOC strength, is non-monotonic, and we start to see some oscillations, especially here now. There are two initial conditions that stay very close to each other and both undergo one oscillation. But if we zoom out, they eventually go to the on versus the off state. So after doing this many times, and now it becomes clear, hopefully, why we needed a rather quick model for this, we get an estimate of the edge state, which looks like this in terms of the AMOC strength. So interestingly, we see these large AMOC oscillations that have an amplitude of, that have a period of, they're not perfectly periodic, but the mean period is around 120 years. Now, since we don't only have the AMOC strength as a variable, but we can look at anything now in the climate model on this edge trajectory, we can investigate what drives these oscillations. And to do this, we separated the oscillating trajectory here into different parts, the minimum, the ascending part, the maximum, and the descending part. And now looked at the North Atlantic region in terms of the convection depth and the sea ice edge. We also looked at other things, but this showed or proved to be quite relevant. So now we come back to the fact that this is not actually resolved convection by solving the Navier-Stokes equations, but coming from this convective adjustment scheme. But by seeing how deep this convective adjustment scheme is triggered, we can estimate the convection depth, and that is what is plotted here. So what we see is that the oscillations are mainly due to an oscillation in convection in the Labrador Sea. I hope you can see my cursor. So for example, here you see that there is convection, and then here also strong convection in the Labrador Sea. But then the sea ice extends over the Labrador Sea and kills the convection. And this is what also happens here. But then the sea ice retreats again, and convection in the Labrador Sea can restart. So there is this competition between the sea ice and the convection that undergoes unstable oscillations here. And we additionally, as is shown by this yellow arrow, we also have some strong inflows of relatively light water that is entering through the Denmark Strait here that can also affect or contribute to shutting off the convection here at the maximum, and then leading again to sea ice retreat. So we have both an oscillating convection in the Labrador Sea and also an oscillating extent and retreat in the sea ice edge. And for comparison, we also have shown here the sea ice edge for the on state and the off state. And we see that the off state differs from the edge state by also covering the region of the Nordic seas here with ice, so that this also kills the convection in the Nordic Sea. So the off state really has no convection here in this North Atlantic deep convection site, whereas on the edge state, convection is always maintained in the Greenland, in the Nordic seas here, but oscillates in the Labrador Sea. All right, let's look at, so this showed the mechanism, and you might wonder, what is this crazy climate state that we have found? Is it at all a proper climate state? Because these large oscillations are maybe don't seem super realistic. But well, energetically, this is a proper climate state. So we have looked at the energy imbalance at the top of the atmosphere and the sea surface. And just like on the on and off state, the Earth is on average in thermodynamic equilibrium here. Or well, not only on average, of course. It is out of equilibrium in terms of the dynamics. We also looked at the meridional ocean heat transport in the Atlantic, and we see that the heat transport on the edge state varies, of course, due to the oscillations, but it is roughly somewhere in between the on and the off state. However, it is not in between the on and the off state in all regards. For example, we have also looked at the average center of mass of the ocean water column, which is a rough estimate of the specific potential energy. And there we see that the edge state has a significantly higher center of mass than the on and the off state, which suggests, or which fits to this picture that we had of the double well potential, where the edge state is a statistical steady state, but it is energetically higher than the attractors. And we can actually map the center of mass of the water column across the whole ocean. This is showing here the difference between edge minus on and edge minus off. So orange means that the edge has a higher center of mass than the on and the off states. And we see that in most regions of the ocean, indeed, the center of mass is higher on this edge state. All right, let us now come back to dynamical systems and the idea of the ensemble splitting. So we have a very high dimensional system now, and we would like to plot or visualize it in a reduced phase space. And there are, of course, almost infinitely many ways to do that. But we found that we get a good description by looking at the zonally averaged salinity field in the Atlantic. And we will look at three variables in the following. We define a meridional salinity gradient, which is defined as the difference between these red boxes here. And this can be seen as proportional to the AMOC strength, because if the AMOC is stronger, then more salt is transported to the North Atlantic, which reduces the salinity gradient. So it is proportional with a minus sign. Additionally, we look at the vertical salinity gradient here in the North Atlantic by taking the difference between these orange dashed boxes. And as a third variable, we are looking at the average salinity in this blue box here, which is the deep North Atlantic salinity. And if we plot the dynamics in these three variables, then we get the following picture here. And maybe now it becomes clear why we chose these variables. They were actually found by an EOF analysis and showed that they roughly do the best job at separating the dynamics in terms of the on, off, and edge states. So what we show here is the on, off, and edge states. And you see that they are clearly separated in this reduced phase space, and that the on state is relatively localized, whereas we see some interesting dynamics in the off state that was not really shown in the AMOC strength. And we also clearly see the oscillations on the edge state here by these closed loops. And the faint blue and orange curves show how trajectories initialized close to the edge state relax to the on and off state. We can also look at other phase space choices and also see that these states are nicely separated. But let us stick with the phase portrait here of the meridional salinity gradient and the vertical salinity gradient, where we get this nice separation of the states. And just as a reference, we have again here the picture in terms of the AMOC strength. And this was for 360 parts per million CO2, where we know we are in the bistable regime. But now we repeated this procedure for 460 ppm, and then we got this picture. So there's quite a lot to look at here. First of all, the off state remains the off state and is fairly stable. The edge state looks at so this is now the green line is again the result we get from the edge tracking algorithm. And it works for a while, so there are always pairs of trajectories that converge either to the on or to the off state. So for a while, it seems like everything is going fine, but then the edge trajectory actually jumps up to where the on state is. And the on state, if we look at it here, it looks like it just has enhanced variability for about 1,000 years. But then after a bit more than 1,000 years, it actually transitions to this regime of fast oscillations that resemble the edge state, then jumps up again and eventually collapses to the off state. And if you now think about these results in light of what we showed in the conceptual climate model, it seems like we have now crossed a boundary crisis, and the former on state, that we had here is actually not asymptotically stable anymore, but can still feature long transients. And we can actually show that we have this boundary crisis by looking at these dynamics in the reduced phase space. So the picture now looks like this. The off state is still in a similar region as before, but now these this intercentennial variability here, or multicentennial variability near the on state is shown by this rotational part here. And then we have a region that is slightly moved, but similar to the edge state region here, which has a faster rotational component. But these are now not separated in the phase space anymore, but have actually merged into one chaotic set, which is what is called the ghost state. And so what this brown trajectory here represents is actually a long chaotic transient near the ghost state until it then goes to the only stable attractor of the model. So we don't exactly know where the boundary crisis occurs between 360 and 460 ppm, but it seems to be close to, but before 460 ppm. Now that we have this enhanced understanding of the phase space, this is of course now looking at constant CO2, so we kind of have snapshots of the phase space at fixed forcing, but we would now like to use that to interpret the results we saw under time-dependent forcing. So let us return, sorry, I just have another slide here to look at this transient a bit more closely, but I think I will just skip this since we are already close to the end of the time. So I wanted to just discuss the trajectories under the SSP forcing now. So recall that we had a low emission scenario here in our model PlaSim-LSG, which looked like this in terms of the AMOC strength. And what we plot in the bottom here is now this phase space view where the gray, the dark gray shading is the area of the edge state at 360 ppm. And the faint gray region is the area of the ghost state at 460 ppm. And we see that under this low emission scenario forcing, actually the trajectories don't really move in phase space, they stay on the on attractor. Now, if we have the SSP2 4.5 scenario, the intermediate climate forcing, then this is where this ensemble splitting occurs, shown here now for 10 ensemble members. And we can see that these trajectories actually move towards the region of the edge state and undergo some of these rotations that characterize the edge state. So we see that some of the trajectories are attracted to these dynamics, whereas others kind of manage to bypass it, and some maybe bypass it only partly, and this leads to the very different responses to the same forcing. If we look at the high emission scenario, all the trajectories actually pass through the region of the edge and the ghost state, but they pass through it so fast, the forcing rate is so high that it seems like these complex geometries in the phase space are invisible. So they kind of just the dynamics of the edge state is masked here, and the trajectories just pass through and then follow the trajectory that is characteristic for the collapse. Now, this was for PlaSim-LSG, and just to round up this talk, I would like to bring us back to the simulations by Romanou et al. By the CMIP6 model. So you might disagree that it is such a nice cow, but it's certainly a much higher resolved cow than the cow that PlaSim-LSG is. So just to give you an idea, we are plotting here the stream function in each of the top panels in the on state and then in the off state, and they look different in absolute values because the AMOC is quite a lot stronger in the NASA GIS model than in PlaSim-LSG, but qualitatively there is a similar structure here and also a similar structure in the off state. And if you look at the salinity fields, the zonally averaged salinity fields between the two models in the on state, there is also a rough similarity, which motivates that we can now actually plot the dynamics that we found in the GIS model in the same way as we plotted our dynamics in PlaSim-LSG, since this projection in terms of differences in the salinity space can be done with any spatially resolved model. So to do this, we choose 3 ensemble members from our PlaSim-LSG simulations and 3 from the GIS model simulations. They are of course not the same because we are here just picking ensemble members from a chaotic system, but we picked them and colored them based on a rough dynamical similarity. So the dark blue one collapses, the orange one recovers quickly or doesn't even really weaken at all, and the green one has a temporary weakening and then a recovery. And if we look at these dynamics in the phase space, we see here that the orange one stays close to where it was for the PlaSim-LSG model. The blue one that collapses just goes through the edge state region and then shoots down. And the trajectory that weakens and recovers undergoes one loop here in the edge state region and then manages to go back to where it came from. And of course, we don't know the edge state in the NASA GIS model. That would be too computationally expensive to compute. But we have just shaded the same region by using the edge state that we found in PlaSim-LSG. And we see that qualitatively there is quite a remarkable similarity. So the collapsing trajectory undergoes a similar path The green one also has this loop and turns back, and the orange one does, it begins to, so this is the weakening here, but it does not really get to the edge state region of the PlaSim-LSG model, but returns beforehand. And interestingly here, the splitting between the green and the blue line also appears in this region. So this is of course not a very well, it's a bit ad hoc because we don't know the edge state in the NASA-GISS model, but we just wanted to motivate that there might be similar dynamics at play in PlaSim-LSG and more complex models of CMIP6. And with that, I just would like to conclude. So we were interested in this ensemble splitting under time-dependent climate forcing that was observed in 2 CMIP6 models, and could show that by computing an edge state and looking at the dynamics in the phase space, we see that this edge state plays an important role for the ensemble splitting by kind of inducing the transient chaos that can lead to a big divergence in an ensemble. And this highlights that there might be additional limitations to the predictability of the AMOC, which are often not considered when you talk about early warning signals or when you just look at ensemble means of CMIP6 models that show that the AMOC ensemble mean will weaken. Yeah, thanks very much for your attention. A preprint on this work will come out very soon. So if you're interested, I will put it on my website here. So you're welcome to take a look at that. And I'm happy to take your questions. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you very much, Reyk. That was a great talk. Very interesting. Yeah, I see. KK, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes, I second Christian. This is a very nice talk, and I appreciate your very careful and comprehensive analysis of the dynamics of transition, and the last part where you compare with GISS model is a very nice touch. It alleviates my concern over you replacing the overturning circulation by a convective adjustment. So it's very nice. My question concerning the last part of your conclusion about the early warning signals. If you do a early warning signal on these states before they transition, you know, this is your phenomena is called ensemble splitting. So for the ensemble, before it splits, and it can go any one of the 3 directions, what are the differences in the early warning signals, or there are none? I would like to find out.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something we have not done. We have not computed the early warning signs for the different ensemble members, and I think that would be very interesting to do. There is a recent paper that came out by Reyk Börner's group that looked at a different system and showed that that early warning signs based on critical slowing down cannot distinguish between different ensemble members that tip or do not tip. And they proposed a machine learning approach that can somehow still find some aspects in the dynamics beforehand that characterize whether you belong to the group that tips or not. That might be an approach, but of course it doesn't give additional physical understanding for now. And my point was just that if we reason about why we would see early warning signs based on critical slowing down, then this would be because we are getting closer to a bifurcation point. And in fact, all these trajectories are getting closer to the bifurcation point in the same way. So I would argue that by construction, an early warning sign based on critical slowing down would not show there. Of course, it's good to check, and I'm happy to do that.
Yes, I think a likely outcome would be that because they are close to a bifurcation, that all three ensemble members will show early warning signals, because it is unstable, but it does not give you which direction it will go. So that may be a reasonable
Yeah.
thing. Now, the early warning signals are sort of more like variance increasing, stuff like that. Do you see the variance increasing for all of them?
I mean, it depends on what frequency you're asking. So here I always plotted annual means, but of course we have monthly data, so we could also look at that. But just by eye, of course, the variance increases already by the fact that we have this centennial variability that is amplified. But again, my aim was not to look at early warning signs here, so I haven't actually computed variance and autocorrelation in moving windows and all of that. But that might be nice to do.
Yes, a more promising early warning signal is what you've shown here with the salinity, Meridional salinity gradient. Maybe check that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it can just generally help a lot to not only look at one-dimensional time series and try to look at their statistics, but this phase-space view, if this turns out to be more robust, where the edge state is located in climate models in certain projections, then also the distance to that region could already be give you an indication of early warning.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yep, go ahead, Chris.
So from the dynamical systems point of view, there seems to be kind of a big assumption underlying the way you look at this, and that is that the basin boundary is given by the stable manifold of a particular edge state, a particular critical point. I mean, that's your sort of lens you're applying to the whole of the thing. And
Yes.
I guess I don't see a reason why we should believe that. I mean, there may be loads of edge states. There may be other states whose stable manifolds form the basin boundary. If that's not right, I mean, one way that might manifest itself is you might choose a different way or a different starting point to try to find your edge state and find a completely different edge state. So the first question is, do you believe that assumption that it is the stable manifold of a particular edge state? And if it isn't true, what are the consequences of that for what you do?
So I definitely don't believe that there has to be only one edge state. I completely agree that if you look at the dynamics restricted to the basin boundary, this might be a multi-stable system in itself, and you might have many attractors on this restricted dynamics, which would then be edge states according to my definition. And as you say, you would be able to find them with edge tracking in principle by starting out from different initial conditions. And we have tried this with one other set of initial conditions. Of course, we cannot do it very often in this model. So that set of initial conditions led to the same edge state again, but that of course is no proof that there might not be many more in other regions. I do think, however, that it seems to be common that there is a relevant edge state for a certain transition scenario. And what I do believe is that the basin boundary in the neighborhood of this edge state, of this relevant edge state, is then given by its stable set.
But why should we believe that that's the relevant one? I mean, why? What makes that more relevant than other edge states?
I don't think we know that a priori. We could see that the one we found here was relevant for the non-autonomous dynamics we saw, but I don't think this was something we only found out afterwards. It was not clear beforehand.
But what's the evidence that you found it out afterwards? That's what's not quite clear to me. What makes you say that it is the relevant one?
So in that we have the strong oscillations on the edge state, and these oscillations are associated with mechanisms that I partly outlined. So for example, the oscillation of the Labrador convection and the sea ice in that area, and we see the same dynamics on the non-autonomous trajectory. So that is one thing, that the similar mechanisms are at play if you want to argue about it from a physical point of view. And then from a phase space point of view, well, of course, we can only, again, look at projections of the phase space, but in those projections that we looked at, the trajectory precisely passes through and loops around, so the rotation is there where this edge state is.
But your projections are biasing it towards that edge state in some sense. Let's see. Well, anyway,
How do
okay.
you mean that? Well, happy to talk about it more.
It's a sort of chicken egg thing. Well, maybe we can talk about it in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for Reyk? Okay. Thank you very much, and let's thank our speaker again. It was a great talk, and sounds like y'all will have interesting things to talk about in Edinburgh. So,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, thank you very much for your interest and for the opportunity.